The wind was a blade of ice, honed on the jagged peaks of the Wailing Mountains and driven into the heart of the forbidden wastes. It flayed the skin from Serenith's cheeks and stole the breath from her lungs before it could warm her. Every gust was a reminder of her exile, a physical manifestation of the coldness that had settled deep in her soul. Snow, thick and merciless, swirled in a blinding vortex, erasing the world, just as she had been erased from her own. She pulled the threadbare cloak tighter, a pathetic shield against the blizzard's fury. It was a fool's hope, she knew. The wastes were a graveyard for outcasts, a final frozen chapter for wolves like her. A curse. That's what Lord Valerius had called her on the day of her rejection. He had stood before the entire Silvermoon pack, his voice dripping with contempt as his gaze swept over her pale hair and skin, the hallmarks of her albino curse. A flaw in the bloodline, he had declared, his words echoing in the hollow chamber of her memory. A weakness we can no longer abide. Her wolf is frail, her color an ill omen. She is no true wolf of this pack. She is nothing. Nothing. The word had clung to her like a shroud. Her designated mate, a promising young beta named Rovan, had looked away, his face a mask of shame and relief. He had been spared the burden of a flawed mate. The rest of the pack had followed his lead, their eyes sliding past her as if she were a ghost already. Only her mother, Elindra, had met her gaze. Her own eyes filled with a sorrow so profound it had been a physical blow. Before Serenith had been cast out, her mother had gripped her hands, her knuckles white. "Be silent, my daughter," she had whispered, a desperate plea. "Endure. Your silence is your shield." And so, Serenith had been silent. She had not protested, had not cried out as the pack guards escorted her to the edge of their territory and pointed her toward the desolate expanse of the wastes. She had walked into the frozen wilderness, carrying the weight of her mother's words and the pack's scorn. That had been 3 days ago. Now her endurance was failing. The cold was winning. A tremor ran through her, not from the chill, but from a deep, primal fear. Her own wolf, a small and timid creature with fur as white as the snow that now threatened to entomb them, whimpered within her. She was too weak to sustain a shift for long, another mark of her inferiority. In this storm, a shift would only drain her faster. Death was close. She could feel its icy fingers tracing the line of her spine. A strange sense of peace settled over her. At least the pain would end. The loneliness, the crushing weight of being nothing. It was a scent on the wind that broke through her resigned trance. Faint, but unmistakable. Blood. And wolf. Not the acrid stench of rogues, but the richer, earthier scent of pack wolves. Curiosity, a long-dormant emotion stirred within her. She was supposed to be the only soul foolish enough to be caught in a storm this severe. Pushing against the gale, she followed the scent, her frozen limbs protesting with every step. The scene she stumbled upon stole the air from her lungs more effectively than the wind ever had. In a small, windswept clearing, a battle had been fought and lost. The snow was churned and stained a grotesque crimson. At least 10 massive wolves lay dead, their powerful bodies twisted in the throes of their final moments. But it was the survivors that held her gaze. Huddled together against the onslaught of the blizzard were 15 more wolves, their fur matted with blood and ice. Most were barely moving, their breaths coming in shallow, frosty puffs. They were not rogues. They radiated a sense of discipline and loyalty, even in their defeat. An ambush. They had been ambushed. Her instinct screamed at her to flee. Whatever had done this could still be near. To involve herself was to invite the same fate. She was weak, starving, and on the verge of freezing to death herself. What could she possibly do for them? But then her eyes landed on the wolf at the center of the huddled group. He was enormous, a titan of a wolf whose fur was the color of a starless midnight, yet shot through with strands of pure, shimmering silver. He was grievously wounded, a deep gash on his flank oozing sluggishly, but he was alive. He lay still, his great head resting on the snow, but a faint aura of immense, suppressed power clung to him, a silent testament to the warrior he was. The other surviving wolves had formed a protective, if failing, crescent around him. They had died protecting him. Something inside Serenith, the gentle, nurturing core of the Omega she had been taught to despise, broke through her fear and despair. She could not leave them. She could not walk away and let them die. It was not in her nature. Her own life was forfeit anyway. If she was to die, let it be in the service of a final, pointless act of kindness. Her gaze swept the surrounding rock formations and she spotted it, a shallow overhang, barely a cave, but it offered some meager protection from the wind. It would have to do. A new, desperate strength flooded her limbs. She would not let them die. She approached the nearest wolf, a large gray female whose leg was bent at an unnatural angle. The wolf growled weakly, her amber eyes filled with pain and suspicion. "I'm not going to hurt you," Serenith whispered, her voice hoarse and raw. "I want to help." She moved slowly, her hands open and non-threatening. The wolf seemed to sense the truth in her, the complete absence of aggression, and allowed Serenith to grip the scruff of her neck. It was brutal, exhausting work. The wolf was heavy, and Serenith was weak. She half dragged, half carried the injured female to the small cave, her muscles screaming in protest. Then she went back. One by one, she moved the survivors, a young male with a deep bite on his shoulder, another with silver-tipped claws embedded in his chest. Each journey back into the blizzard was a fresh torment, the wind tearing at her, the snow trying to claim her. But the image of the great shadow wolf, so powerful yet so vulnerable, pushed her onward. She saved him for last. He was heavier than any two of the others combined. As she reached for him, her frozen fingers brushed against his fur. A jolt, like a spark of static electricity, shot up her arm. It was startling, a flicker of warmth in the suffocating cold. Ignoring it, she wrapped her arms around his massive chest, her face buried in the thick, surprisingly soft fur of his neck. He smelled of pine, of winter earth, and of something else, something uniquely his: power, authority. "Come on," she grunted, pulling with every ounce of her remaining strength. He was a dead weight, his unconsciousness absolute. "You can't die. You're too magnificent to die here." She pulled and strained, her boots slipping in the blood-slicked snow. Tears of effort and frustration froze on her cheeks. Her body screamed for her to stop, to give up, to lie down and let the snow take her. But she thought of Lord Valerius's sneer. Weak. Nothing. The words became a perverse mantra, fueling her defiance. A weak, worthless nothing would not be able to do this. She would prove him wrong, if only to herself and a dying wolf in a blizzard. With a final, desperate heave, she dragged the shadow wolf's body over the lip of the cave entrance. He was in. They were all in. Serenith collapsed at the mouth of the cave, her body spent. The small space was crowded with wounded wolves, their pained groans and shallow breathing filling the air. The wind howled outside, but in here its bite was lessened. She crawled deeper, positioning herself beside the great shadow wolf. He was the most injured, and the cold was his greatest enemy now. She unwrapped her thin cloak and draped it over his wounded flank. It was a pitifully small gesture, but it was all she had. Then, without a second thought, she curled her own small body against his, hoping to share what little warmth she had left. His fur was thick, and beneath it, his body was like a banked furnace, still holding a core of heat. As the hours passed and the storm raged on, A strange delirium took hold of her. Huddled against the unconscious form, she began to speak, the words spilling out in a quiet, broken whisper. Her mother's final command for silence had been for the world of her pack, for her tormentors. This dying wolf was not of that world. He was a safe repository for her pain. They said I was a curse, she murmured, her breath fogging in the frigid air. Because my fur is white. My eyes are pale. They said I was a blight on the purity of their line. She stroked his massive head, her fingers tracing the line of his powerful jaw. I tried so hard to be good, to be useful, but it was never enough. When you are born flawed, everything you do is seen through the lens of that flaw. She confessed her loneliness, the aching void in her chest that had been her constant companion since childhood. She spoke of her rejection, of the look in Rovin's eyes, of the crushing weight of being utterly and completely unwanted. I just wanted to matter, she whispered, a single hot tear escaping to freeze on her cheek. Just once, to one person, to know that I wasn't nothing. Pressing closer to the wolf, she felt a profound sense of peace. Her body was failing. The cold was seeping into her bones, a lethargy she knew she could not fight for much longer. But she wasn't alone. In her final moments, she was providing comfort to another living being. It was a better end than she could have hoped for. "You're so strong," she said to the wolf, her voice fading. "Whatever happens, I'm glad I found you." Her consciousness frayed, and she slipped into a darkness as deep and absolute as the shadow wolf's fur. Serenith awoke to the crunch of boots on snow. Her first coherent thought was of the cold. It was gone. She was wrapped in a profound warmth, a cocoon of heat that felt utterly alien. Her eyes fluttered open. She was still in the cave, still pressed against the massive flank of the shadow wolf. But his fur was radiating heat like a hearth, and draped over both of them was not her threadbare cloak, but a thick, heavy, fur-lined mantle that smelled of leather and authority. The sounds from outside the cave grew louder. Voices, deep, commanding, and laced with urgency. Panic seized her. The ambushers had returned to finish the job. She scrambled to her feet, her body protesting, and placed herself protectively at the cave's entrance, a small pale wraith against the brilliant white of the snow-covered landscape. A group of at least 20 warriors stood in the clearing. They were clad in black armor inlaid with silver, their movements precise and disciplined. They were scanning the area, their expressions grim. At their head stood a man with a stern, scarred face and the unmistakable air of a beta. His eyes swept the clearing and finally landed on her. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Serenith's exhaustion. She braced herself, ready to fight, to scream, to do anything to give the wolves behind her a few more seconds. The beta's eyes widened slightly, taking in her disheveled state, before his gaze flickered to the cave behind her. He took a step forward. "Stay back," Serenith cried, her voice thin but fierce. The beta, a man she would later know as Gideon, ignored her. He and his men advanced, their focus entirely on the cave. Just as they reached the entrance, a wave of power rolled out from behind her, so immense and suffocating it buckled her knees. It was an alpha's command, but magnified 100-fold, a pressure that demanded submission from the very air itself. All 20 warriors, including the stern beta, immediately dropped to one knee, their heads bowed in absolute deference. Serenith stared, bewildered. The pressure receded, and she turned to see the source. The shadow wolf was gone. In his place, a man was rising to his feet. He was naked, his body a tapestry of lean, powerful muscle, marred by the deep, still bleeding gash on his side and a dozen other cuts and bruises. He was tall, his shoulders broad, and his hair was as black as a raven's wing, shot through with the same startling silver as his wolf's fur. He turned his head, and his eyes met hers. They were the color of molten silver, intelligent, ancient, and filled with an intensity that seemed to look straight into her soul. "Your Majesty," Gideon breathed from outside the cave, his voice thick with relief. "We tracked the assassins. They will not trouble you again." We feared. We feared we were too late. The man, the king, nodded, his gaze never leaving Serenith. "You were almost right, Gideon," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through her bones. "If not for her." He took a step toward her, and it was only then that she realized she was staring. She quickly averted her eyes, a hot flush creeping up her neck. She had just spent the night curled against this man, pouring out her deepest secrets to him. The king, an alpha king. The realization was a dizzying blow. King Theron stopped before her, his presence utterly overwhelming. He was wounded and unclothed, yet he radiated more power and authority than Lord Valerius in his full regalia. He reached out, his fingers gently tilting her chin up so she was forced to meet his silver eyes. "You saved my life," he said, his voice softer now, for her alone. "You saved what is left of my personal guard. You, who had nothing, gave everything." Serenith shook her head, unable to speak. The world was tilting on its axis. This was impossible. A dream born of cold and starvation. He saw the disbelief in her eyes, the terror. His expression softened further, and then he said the word that shattered the fragile remnants of her reality. "Mate." The word hung in the air between them, small and yet cataclysmic. It was not a question, it was a statement. A declaration of fact as undeniable as the sunrise. Serenith felt a phantom echo of the jolt she'd felt when she first touched his fur, but this time it was 1,000 times stronger, a current of warmth and light that surged through her, chasing away the last of the soul-deep chill. She stumbled back, shaking her head violently. "No," she whispered, the sound torn from her throat. "No, you're mistaken. It's not possible." "The moon goddess does not make mistakes," King Theron said, his voice firm but gentle. He took another step, closing the distance between them. The sheer force of his proximity made her want to bolt, yet the pull of the bond held her rooted to the spot. "But I am—" Her voice broke. She had to make him understand. She had to make him see the truth before this went any further, before the hope this one word ignited could grow and be brutally extinguished. "I am a rejected Omega, an outcast. My wolf is weak, my blood is cursed. I'm an albino, a flaw. I am nothing." The last word was a choked sob, the summation of her entire existence. Theron's silver eyes blazed, but not with pity, with anger. An anger not directed at her, but at the words she spoke, at whoever had taught her to believe them. He reached out and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin as if she were made of spun glass. The calluses on his hand were a rough counterpoint to the tenderness of his touch. "Nothing?" he repeated, his voice a low growl. "You dragged 15 of my royal guard, each of them twice your size, into shelter during a killing storm. You used your own body to shield me from the cold, ready to give your life for a stranger. You stood, armed with nothing but courage, against 20 of my best warriors to protect us." He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "What you call a flaw, I call light. I have lived in shadow for 500 years, Serenith. I have waited for a mate whose heart was strong enough to rule beside me. Not a mate with a powerful wolf or a pure bloodline, but one with compassion, with courage, with a soul of pure light to balance my darkness. The goddess did not give me a flaw. She gave me my perfect counterpart." Her mind reeled. 500 years. He was the Shadow Wolf King, Theron, a figure of legend. A king so ancient and powerful his name was spoken in whispers even in the most remote packs. And he was claiming her. Her, the cast-off, the nothing. Gideon cleared his throat from the cave entrance. Your Majesty, your wounds. Theron did not look away from Serenith. He slid the heavy mantle from his shoulders and wrapped it around her, enveloping her in his scent and warmth. It was an act of possession so clear, so absolute, that it left no room for doubt. Then he turned his head slightly, his voice ringing with an authority that echoed off the frozen rocks. This is Serenith, he declared to his waiting men. She is my mate, your future queen. From this moment forward, your life is sworn to her as it is to me. You will show her every respect, and you will obey her as you would obey me. A collective gasp went through the warriors, but their training was absolute. As one, they dropped to their knees again, this time their focus on the small, pale woman wrapped in their king's cloak. Our queen, Gideon said, his voice filled with awe and conviction. The world swam before Serenith's eyes. Queen. The word was so foreign, so utterly absurd. She felt a hysterical laugh bubble in her throat. She swayed on her feet. The rush of events, the power of the bond, the sheer impossibility of it all crashing down on her at once. Strong arms caught her before she could fall. King Theron lifted her as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his bare, wounded chest. She felt the steady beat of his heart against her ear, a rhythm that seemed to calm the frantic fluttering of her own. Rest, my light, he murmured, his voice a soothing balm against her frayed nerves. You are safe now. I have you. As he carried her out of the cave and into the light, leaving the darkness of her past behind, Serenith finally succumbed to the overwhelming exhaustion and let the blackness claim her once more. She awoke in a bed so soft she felt as though she were floating on a cloud. For a moment she was disoriented, the scent of lavender and clean linen a stark contrast to the metallic tang of blood and frozen earth she remembered. Sunlight streamed through a tall, arched window, illuminating a room of breathtaking scale and elegance. The walls were made of a dark, polished stone that seemed to drink the light, but the furnishings were rich and warm. Deep crimson tapestries, dark wood furniture inlaid with silver, and a fire crackling merrily in a massive stone hearth. Panic fluttered in her chest as memory returned. The blizzard, the wolves, the king. She sat up, clutching the thick silk sheets to her chest. She was wearing a simple, soft chemise of fine white cotton. Her own ragged clothes were gone. A tray of food sat on a table beside the bed. Steaming broth, fresh bread, and cheese. Her stomach growled, a painful reminder of how long it had been since she'd eaten a real meal. The door opened softly, and a young woman in a servant's uniform entered, her eyes downcast. My queen, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She curtsied low. The king sent me to see if you were awake. He asks if you will join him for the evening meal. Queen. The word still sounded like a discordant note in the symphony of her life. Please, don't call me that, Serenith said, her voice small. My name is Serenith. The servant looked up, her expression a mixture of fear and confusion. But, the king commanded. I know, Serenith said gently, not wanting to frighten the girl. Thank you. Please tell His Majesty that I will join him. The next few days passed in a dreamlike haze. She was a ghost in a palace, a pale shadow drifting through halls of obsidian and granite. The Shadow Wolf Kingdom's capital was a fortress city, carved into the heart of a mountain, yet it was filled with an unexpected warmth. Courtyards were open to the sky, filled with winter-hardy gardens, and great fires burned in every hall. The people were reserved and watchful, their gazes following her with a mixture of curiosity and reverence that made her skin crawl. She was given a new wardrobe of beautiful gowns in shades of white, silver, and pale blue, a stark contrast to the dark, practical clothing worn by everyone else. It was another way Theron marked her as his, as different, as light. But to Serenith, it only made her feel more like an exhibit, a strange, pale creature put on display. King Theron was a constant, patient presence. He was recovering from his own injuries, his side bandaged, but he moved with an innate grace that even the wounds could not diminish. He did not push her. He did not demand she accept the bond or her new role. Instead, he gave her space, a gift she hadn't realized she so desperately needed. He would invite her to walk in the snow-dusted gardens, the silence between them comfortable. He would join her in the vast library, reading from ancient texts, while she simply absorbed the quiet and the warmth of the fire. At their evening meals, held in a small private dining room away from the prying eyes of the court, he would ask her questions about her life. At first, her answers were clipped and evasive. The habit of silence ingrained by her mother's desperate plea was hard to break. But Theron was endlessly patient. He never pressed, simply waiting, his silver eyes conveying a depth of understanding that slowly, painstakingly, chipped away at her defenses. One night, as a fresh snow fell outside the windows, she finally told him everything. The shame of her birth, the constant whispers, the averted eyes. She told him of Lord Valerius's cruelty, the daily humiliations, the way he had made her feel like dirt beneath his heel. And she told him of the rejection, the public shearing of her worth, the finality of being declared nothing. Throughout her story, Theron remained silent, his hands clenched into tight fists on the table. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of such contained fury that it made the fine crystal glasses tremble. When she finished, her voice choked with unshed tears, he reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was firm, grounding. "What that fool, Valerius cast aside," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "was a treasure he was too blind to see. He will answer for what he did to you, I swear it." His fierce protectiveness was a balm on her wounded soul. But the fear remained, a persistent cold knot in her stomach. This was all a mistake. He saw her as a hero, a savior. But she was just Serenith. Small, weak, and flawed. What would happen when he realized his mistake? The thought of facing another rejection, this time from her fated mate, a king, was a pain she was certain she would not survive. The pull of the mate bond was undeniable, a constant low thrum beneath her skin. It called to her, promising warmth, acceptance, a sense of belonging she had craved her entire life. When she was near him, the gnawing emptiness inside her receded, but her fear was a wall of ice, built brick by brick over a lifetime of hurt. She could not bring herself to tear it down. She could not trust that the safety she felt in his arms was real. Her insecurity was not helped by the subtle hostilities she faced within the palace walls. While most of the staff were deferential on the surface, she felt their skepticism. The head cook, a stern, stout woman named Magra, often served her meals lukewarm. And then there was Cyrilda. Cyrilda was a high-ranking noblewoman of the Shadow Wolf court, beautiful and fierce, with hair as black as Theron's and eyes like chips of obsidian. It was common knowledge that her family had hoped she would be the one to finally capture the king's heart. She made no secret of her disdain for Serenith. "I fail to see what is so special about her," Cyrilda commented one afternoon, her voice loud enough for Serenith, who was passing in the hall, to hear clearly. She was speaking to a group of fawning courtiers. "A pale, washed-out little thing, an omega, no less. The king is too gracious. He mistakes pity for a mate bond. The words were like a physical blow, reinforcing every doubt Serenith had about herself. She fled to her rooms, her heart pounding. Cyrilda was right. Theron was powerful, magnificent. She was a pity case, a stray he had found in the snow. The bond was a fluke, a trick of fate, and soon he would see it. Soon he would reject her, just like everyone else. The thought was a shard of ice in her heart, and she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold the broken pieces of her fragile hope together. The day of the annual sovereignty tribute arrived a week later. Packs from across the continent sent delegations to the Shadowwolf capital to renew their oaths of fealty and pay their respects to their overlord, King Theron. The great throne room, a cavernous hall of black marble and silver inlay, was filled with the powerful and the proud. Alphas and betas in their finest attire filled the space, their combined presence a heavy weight in the air. Serenith was expected to be there, at Theron's side. He had commissioned a gown for her, a breathtaking creation of white silk embroidered with silver thread that mimicked the patterns of frost on a window pane. It made her feel like a porcelain doll, beautiful but fragile, and utterly out of place. As she stood on the dais just behind his massive obsidian throne, her hands trembled. Theron, sensing her distress, reached back without looking, his large hand finding hers and giving it a reassuring squeeze. The simple contact sent a wave of warmth through her, steadying her nerves, but the fear remained. One by one, the delegations came forward. The scarred alpha of the Stonecrag pack, Krathor, a brute of a man, offered a chest of raw iron ore. The lithe alpha of the Riverbend pack offered silks and spices. And then the herald announced the next delegation, and the blood drained from Serenith's face. Presenting Lord Valerius, High Counselor of the Silver Moon Pack. Time seemed to slow down. Serenith's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run, to hide, to become invisible. She instinctively took a step back, trying to conceal herself behind the bulk of Theron's throne. But it was too late. Lord Valerius strode forward, radiating an aura of smug self-importance. He was flanked by two of his pack's senior warriors, but his eyes were fixed on the king. He bowed, a shallow, perfunctory gesture. "Your Majesty, the Silver Moon Pack brings its tribute and renews its vow of loyalty." As he straightened up, his gaze swept the dais, and his eyes fell upon Serenith. For a moment, there was only confusion. He did not recognize the pale, trembling woman in the magnificent gown. Then, a flicker of recognition dawned in his eyes, quickly followed by disbelief, and then a wave of pure, unadulterated fury. He saw not a queen, but the rejected Omega who had somehow infiltrated the royal court. A cruel, contemptuous sneer twisted his lips. He thought she was a servant, a concubine perhaps, who had foolishly overstepped her station. He decided to make an example of her, to show his own pack's intolerance for such filth. "You!" he barked, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent throne room. All eyes turned to him, then to Serenith. "Filth! What is a rejected, worthless Omega doing in the king's presence? Have you no shame?" Serenith froze, her blood turning to ice. The old terror, the familiar humiliation, washed over her in a suffocating wave. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, judging her, seeing her through Valerius's words. She was nothing, a flaw, filth. Valerius took a step toward the dais, his hand outstretched as if to grab her and drag her away. "She is property of the Silver Moon Pack, an outcast to be punished. I will remove this embarrassment from your sight, Your Majesty." Before his foot could even touch the first step of the dais, it happened. Theron, who had been sitting as still as a statue, moved. He did not rise from his throne. He simply lifted his head, and his power, the full unbridled might of the Shadow Wolf King crashed down upon the hall. It was not like the gentle pressure he had used before. This was a physical force, a tidal wave of dominance and rage that slammed into every person in the room. The weaker wolves cried out and collapsed. The alphas and betas, strong as they were forced to their knees, their heads bowed, gasping for breath. Lord Valerius was hit the hardest. He was flung back, as if by an invisible hand, landing in a heap on the marble floor. The Alpha Command focused on him, pinning him, crushing him, forcing the air from his lungs. He choked, his face turning purple, his eyes wide with terror and agony. Theron rose slowly from his throne, a figure of terrible majesty. He descended the steps, his silver eyes glowing with a cold, lethal light. He stopped before the groveling form of Lord Valerius. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a shard of obsidian, laced with deadly calm. "You dare," he began, each word a hammer blow, "to speak to your queen that way." A collective gasp, muffled by the crushing pressure, rippled through the kneeling crowd. Valerius's eyes widened in horror, comprehension dawning too late. "You stand in my hall," Theron continued, his voice dropping even lower. "And you call the light of my life, the other half of my soul, filth? You call the woman who saved my life when I lay dying worthless? You are not just a fool, Valerius. You are blind." Theron crouched, bringing his face level with the terrified counselors. "She told me what you did. The years of torment, the public humiliation. You took a priceless gem, a soul of pure kindness and courage, and you tried to crush it. You cast away the greatest treasure your pack would ever know because you were too small, too obsessed with status and power, to recognize true worth." He placed a hand on Valerius's shoulder, and the man screamed as a jolt of pure power surged through him. "Let me make this clear," Theron snarled, the sound a primal promise of violence. "Serenith is my mate. She is the queen of the Shadow Wolf Kingdom and all its territories, which means she is your queen. You will kneel before her, and you will beg for her forgiveness. And then you will return to your miserable pack and inform them that their tribute is rejected. Your fealty is worthless to me. Pray that your queen is more merciful than her king, for if it were up to me, the Silver Moon Pack would be a footnote in the history books by dawn." He released Valerius, who collapsed, sobbing and gasping for air. The immense pressure in the room receded, but no one dared to move. Theron turned and walked back to the dais. He stood before Serenith, his expression softening as he looked at her. And in that moment, something inside her broke. Not in the old, painful way, but in a great, shattering release. The wall of ice she had built around her heart, the fear, the doubt, the ingrained worthlessness, it all cracked and melted away under the fiery heat of his defense. Watching her lifelong tormentor brought so low, hearing her worth declared so fiercely and absolutely before the most powerful wolves on the continent, was the most profound catharsis she had ever known. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of pain or humiliation. They were tears of relief, of vindication, of a hope so bright it was blinding. She looked at Theron, at this magnificent, terrifying, and gentle king who saw her, truly saw her, and loved what he saw. He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "It is over, my light," he murmured. "No one will ever harm you again." She took a shaky breath, and for the first time, she did not shrink from his touch. She leaned into it, a silent surrender. The last of the ice had melted. Later that evening, after the stunned delegations had been dismissed and the court had retreated into hushed whispers, Serenith found Theron standing on a private balcony overlooking the starlit mountains. The air was cold, but she no longer felt it. The warmth that now bloomed in her chest was more than enough to keep the chill at bay. She came to stand beside him, wrapping her arms in the heavy cloak he had given her, the one that had started it all. He turned to her, his silver eyes searching her face, his expression uncertain for the first time since she had met him. He was waiting for her verdict. He had defended her, claimed her, avenged her. But he had never forced her. The final choice was still hers. Looking up at him, at his strong, handsome face, at the concern and love shining in his eyes, she felt no fear, only a profound sense of peace, a sense of coming home. The shattered pieces of her soul, which she had thought were lost forever, were knitting themselves back together, made stronger by the bond that flowed between them. Lord Valerius was right about one thing, she said softly, her voice clear and steady. A flicker of pain crossed Theron's face. Serenith. She placed her fingers on his lips, silencing him. He said I was nothing, she continued. And I was. I was a vessel of fear and shame, an echo of other people's hatred, but I'm not anymore. She took a deep breath, letting the last of her old self fall away. You saw a queen in the snow when all I saw was a broken girl. You saw light when all I knew was shadow. You saw my strength when all I felt was weakness. She reached up and cupped his jaw, her touch now confident and sure. I choose you, Theron, king of the Shadow Wolves, she said, her voice ringing with a newfound authority. I accept this bond. I accept this life. I accept you. Relief, so profound it was almost a physical blow, washed over his features. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for centuries. Serenith, he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the universe. I thought, he began, his voice rough. I feared the wounds were too deep, that I could never reach you. You reached me from the moment I found you, she whispered against his chest. You just had to help me find myself. He pulled back just enough to look down at her, his silver eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Then let us make it real, he murmured. He lowered his head and his lips met hers. It was not a kiss of possession or of royal decree. It was a kiss of equals, of two souls finding their mirror image. It was fire and starlight, shadow and light. A silent vow that sealed the cracks in her heart with gold. The mate bond, which had been a steady hum, flared into a brilliant, blinding supernova, flooding every part of her being with love, acceptance, and a power she never knew she could possess. It was not just a feeling of being loved, it was a feeling of being known, utterly and completely. Their official mating ceremony was held a month later under the light of a full moon. Serenith stood beside her king, not as a pale, flawed Omega, but as Queen Serenith, the moon-blessed, her white hair and fair skin no longer seen as a curse, but as a divine mark of the goddess's favor. The people of the Shadow Wolf Kingdom, who had once watched her with skepticism, now looked upon her with adoration. They saw the way their ancient, lonely king looked at her, as if she were the sun, and they saw the quiet strength and compassion she brought to his side. Her past was not a source of shame, but the foundation of her reign. Having known cruelty, she championed kindness. Having known isolation, she created havens for the outcasts and the lost, ensuring no one in their vast kingdom would ever feel as worthless as she once had. Her supposed weakness, her Omega's nurturing heart, became her greatest strength as a ruler, tempering Theron's immense power with unwavering empathy. Standing on the great balcony of the palace, looking out over the moonlit peaks, she felt Theron's arm wrap around her waist, pulling her back against his solid warmth. She was no longer the girl lost in the snow. She was a queen, a mate, a beloved wife, Her journey through the frozen wastes of despair had not been an end, but a necessary path. It had led her here. It had led her home.